thank you, first of all, for being here. Appreciate it. Just this morning, you guys introduced a bill on cigarette taxes. It was not the increase that folks have been talking about for a while, but it's tied in because it might help the increase go through in the long run, won't it?
Okay. The bill we had this morning was one brought by Speaker Denny that works to level the playing field, so to speak, between the reservations and the rest of us. And yes, I think that the fact that we bring this bill first gives some comfort to those convenience stores and others that have been selling cigarettes in the area of the reservations. Some comfort that the tax level on the reservations will be the same as it will be off the reservations.
Because they've never been tied in with the same. The state hasn't directed.
We've never directed that. Some tribes, the Kootenai tribe, they have, in fact, held their tax or the sales price of their cigarettes the same as the state. The show bands down in my area have been somewhat less than us, but they do have a tax on cigarettes. And the Coeur d'Alene's, I'm not sure exactly what they do, but I understand it's very limited. Yeah, very limited.
And this money would stay on with the with the tribes.
And under this bill, if they raise their tax levy to the same as the state is, they keep the money. And so why wouldn't they want to do that? If they don't, then the state can assess the difference between what they're assessing, if anything, and what we're charging the rest of the state. And then the state takes the money, but the tribal members can get a rebate from the state for the tax that the tribal members paid. Non-tribal members that buy cigarettes on the reservation under the new law, under this law, that money would go to the state, not to the tribes.
And this idea has been around a long time, but it hasn't always gone.
There's been some issues with this, tribal sovereignty and things like that. However, I understand that there is a Supreme Court ruling coming out of Washington, Washington versus the Colville tribe, that did in fact allow the very thing to happen that we're doing with that bill.
And I do want to talk a little bit about the cigarette tax increase. You guys have talked about $1.25 on a pack, but it hasn't come out yet, kind of letting things get to the point where people are maybe more ready to start talking about that sort of thing. What brought you on board this time around, at least to be interested?
Okay, I'm happy to talk about that particular issue because just so you'll know, the Health Coalition, who is bringing the bill, came to me last year and wanted to bring the bill then. And as you well know, last year we had to force base budgets down simply because we didn't have the revenues to fund budgets the way they were. So we all knew that all base budgets had to come down. And I didn't want the idea of some potential revenue hanging out there as being a distraction from what we knew we had to do last year. So we didn't bring the bill last year. This year they approached me early on, before the session even started, and asked if they could bring the bill this year. And I told them yes, they could, and not only that, I'd sponsor it for them. So that's how I become involved in the legislation. There are some reasons why you haven't seen it yet. One is we had this issue of the tribes to deal with. It would have been very difficult for some of the border communities to have the increased cigarette tax that we're talking about apply to them and not apply to the reservation. I think a lot of the cigarette sales would have migrated to the reservation. And the other thing is that we were waiting till later in the session so that some of the things such as the budget could gel and people would know exactly how much revenues were available. Now understand this, I'm not bringing the bill as a revenue enhancing bill. That's not why we're bringing it. We're bringing it as a bill to discourage utilization of tobacco products. The evidence out there is overwhelming that raising the price of the products certainly decreases utilization, particularly with young people. In fact, raising $1.25, the evidence will show that it'll be about 19% of your young kids that would ordinarily start will not start. And so I think those are the reasons why we bring the bill. The additional revenue is incidental. If it was the best of all worlds, for me, it'd be revenue neutral. There'd be enough people quit that it wouldn't raise any additional revenue, but we know that's not going to happen.
Well, and that's the thing, you know you're spending money on tobacco-related things.
And we're designating the money to go to tobacco problems. This is a figure that was new to me this year. I did not realize that every tax-paying family in the state of Idaho incurs about $530 worth of expense to cover the health care costs of those using tobacco products. It is an amazing figure. So I don't look at the increase in the tobacco tax as a tax at all, but I look at it as being a user fee. And those that, if they want to use it, that's their business, but they should ought to help pay for the costs that are incurred because of it.
Now, have you looked elsewhere? I mean, some of the stuff I had written down here, you saw where, alcohol. I mean, there are other, the so-called sin taxes.
There are other areas we can look for additional revenue. I have not focused on any of them. I have several bills in my desk right now that raise revenue one way or another. You're familiar with House Bill 29, which is a bill that Representative Bringo introduced as a personal bill. And what it does is it raises about $370 million in revenue, as I recall, by taking away the exemption on services. In other words, everybody start paying taxes on going to the barber, going to the mechanic, or going to the dentist or doctor, whoever the case may be. I have that bill. We haven't acted on it. Whether we will act on it or not, I don't know. I have another bill that would raise the sales tax penny. We may see that. We may have to see if there's interest in doing that. I don't think there is. And I have a number of other ideas that are just floating out there for revenue enhancements. We have a group of people that's their solution to our problem is to raise a lot more money. I don't think that's what we'll end up doing.
Right. Now, Majority Leader Moyle was at the press club yesterday, and he was saying, right now you're not going to get anything through, but they haven't faced it. I mean, that always happens. I mean, you're rare to get a tax increase in January or February under any circumstance. Do you think, I mean, obviously things are going to change when people have to sit up there and vote on the actual cuts in Medicaid, and if there need to be some in education and some of the others. I mean, that seems like, in my experience, when those attitudes change a little bit.
And you're pointing out the very thing that why you haven't seen the cigarette tax bill, one of the other reasons why you have not seen it yet. We call it letting the fruit ripen, and we're waiting for a decision out of the germane committees, either in health and welfare or in education, to see if they can in fact make the cuts. I know that in the presentations that JFAC has heard from a number of the agencies, they're saying, we just can't do anymore. We have done all we can do. Does it make any sense, for example, to cut the funding for the tax commission by 5%, when in fact, on the other hand, we're increasing the number of auditors? So put money in here, take it off here. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right, and one of those where if you did have to cut back on auditors, then you're just cutting back on the amount of money you can bring in instead of itself. And easy one there. It gets tougher, I suppose, with drug treatment in prisons. How much of those monies that you spend today do you save tomorrow, and how do you play that out?
Right, and these are things that the germane committees really need to sort out and hear what the people have to say on the issue.
Well, you think now that they're targeting this 90, I mean, it looked like for a while 185 or auditors 35 wasn't, didn't hold up very long, and nobody really thought it was going to, I don't think, but with a $92 million gap, which is pretty big, but not as big as maybe some people feared coming in. I mean, do you think that's going to affect the discussion in the long run? I mean, if it's...
Well, the JFAC solution to that was a 5% cut. And again, we've got to see what the germane committees are going to say about that. If they can look through their area of expertise and say, yes, we can do it, fine. I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, we will be looking for some additional revenues, and it just so happens that the cigarette tax that is estimated to raise roughly $50 million will be the first solution we look to. Beyond that, if there's other things we need to do, we'll cross that bridge at the time we.
Well, and it lets you tie it into Medicaid fairly directly. I mean, where a lot of the costs are.
That's right. And the bill we're writing does, in fact, tie it to Medicaid.
Now, just wanted to ask you, because I was thinking about it this morning, there was some talk about it before the session started, maybe targeting that the credit for what the sales tax you pay on groceries as another potential thing that would hit everybody, but you could do it for a year or two and help catch up.
I think to make the budget that they're anticipating, we do in fact have to freeze the expansion of the credit, which is a $15 million item for 2 years. There has been talk about removing the grocery tax credit in its entirety. If we did that, it could raise another $80 or $90 million. I haven't heard that much discussion of late of doing that. So whether it's something that just is on the back burner, I don't have a bill presently to go that route, but it may be something that fills the gap in the final minutes of the session.
Well, that's, and one of the things I think I read in the Business Insider was that one of the things you're not overly interested in is something like that grocery tax credit. It says, well, we can't do it now, but we'll cut taxes in a year or two, or we'll set up some triggers in this sort of long-term. There's always the pressure to cut taxes, even when you don't have any money. And one of the ways you do that is with these sort of future promises. But it does get complicated in years like this, where you've told people you're going to do something and then you can't. And
it does. But remember, when we wrote the bill in 2007, I think is when it came out, we actually made the provisions at that time for the eventuality that we're in right now to stop the expansion of the credit. So
would you be interested in stuff like that in terms of income taxes or things?
Well, other taxes. The governor spoke of reducing the income tax rate.
Representative Hagedorn.
His concept, and Representative Hagedorn is working on that. But every time he starts to see how it's going to fit into the budgetary scheme, he runs into problems. One of the things they talked about doing is, yes, pass a bill now and not implement it for a couple of years. I'm not excited about that. I think that if we're not going to implement it for a couple of years, we'll wait a couple of years to pass the bill.
And, one thing we're still getting, both at the Statesman and at public TV and questions is, well, why don't they I can't believe they're not going to do the sales tax thing or the internet sales tax. That would solve a lot of problems immediately, but I think that's kind of a misconception about how that that would work and how it would.
We had the little bill that put us at the table to discuss streamlined sales tax. That's what we call it, and what it is a group of states that meet together periodically to determine how you can go about collecting sales tax from a vendor and then distributing that sales tax to the appropriate local units of government. And when they first started talking about this thing 10 years ago, well, they're going to have everybody have exactly the same sales tax rate across the country. And as time has progressed and technology's got better, they now can actually return to each state the amount of sales tax that state has on their books, 6% for Idaho, maybe 5% for somebody else. And they can also return to the local taxing districts, if there's local option tax, one division. In other words, they could send back to Sun Valley, for example, that has a 2% sales tax up there, in addition to our 6%. They could send that to them, one division for each state. So technology is helping that along. We still have the issue of the Quill decision back in 1994, I think, that brought all this to a stop, which said we couldn't tax internet sales because there was no way for a vendor to know where he was supposed to send the money. And that's what the Streamlined Sales Tax Group is all about, is determining that. Doesn't raise us any money immediately. If we're at the table, there are some firms out there that are remitting the money voluntarily when they know how to do it. But it will take an act of Congress to overturn the Quill decision before we can force internet vendors to pay sales tax.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because it
the interesting
seems that
thing
everybody
is,
thinks it's
Greg, though, you have to know is everybody owes a tax,
right.
And there's a line on the tax return to fill out. If you in fact buy something on the internet, you should pay the tax because we have a sales tax or a use tax. So you owe the money.
And some of those new auditors are asking about that.
And they are. And in fact, we introduced a little bill just this last week that would highlight that particular line and refer to the word internet in bold print. And in fact, if the bill comes out in the form that it's in, it would require a positive action on that line. You'd have to put a figure there or zero before your tax return is complete. Interesting little bill.
Right, which is probably the sociologists will tell you will do a lot. Because
Yeah.
it's one thing to just ignore it. It's another thing to intentionally
Have to make an
zero.
affirmative action there.
That's
Right.
But it's, because that is a weird issue that nobody thinks it's fairer. I mean, obviously, if you go buy a book at the local bookstore, you order it off Amazon, it doesn't, it certainly doesn't help Idaho businesses to have it. But when there's nothing the state can do.
And this really gets to be a huge item on big ticket items, like camera, for example. So easy to go down to the camera store and look at the camera you want to buy, and then get the serial number off from it and order it off the internet and save the tax. Think you save the tax, you still owe it.
Still right.
Got to enforce that idea.